Welcome back to Plato's Republic. We're going to finish Book 7 today. If you're just joining us, you probably don't want to finish Book 7 just today. You probably want to finish it in a couple days after you binge watch the first 13 episodes of this series. I'll have a link down in the description for you. Everybody else, you remember from the last video, we encountered the most famous, perhaps the most famous passage in all of philosophy, the allegory of the cave. And it's a beautiful visual. So it's not just famous, I think, conceptually for this powerful idea that we'll never really know what reality is, but also because you can almost feel like you're there in the stockade, down in the cave with the fire behind you and the guy with the Abraham Lincoln puppet, and you're just looking at the shadows on the wall, and you think the shadows are real because they have a certain logic to them. Some things happen after other things. There are certain sounds associated with certain shadows, so you come up with words to describe the different shapes that you see. But really, there's kind of these puppeteers behind you. And even if you manage to get out of the stockade and look at the puppeteers, you're still in the cave. And that's kind of the most interesting part to me, is that you never know when you've really broken out. So in this allegory, not only do you have to break your chains or your fetters and, I don't know, assault the puppet masters, you got to climb up out of the cave into the light of the sun. And Socrates says that your eyes won't be ready for it. You'll strain under the bright light of the sun, barely be able to see anything, and it'll take a while for your eyes to adjust. And in his telling, the sun is the good. And so that's something he had talked about a bit in Book 6, kind of the nature of the good, being this thing that illuminates objects of knowledge. And it's all pretty abstract. I don't think this theory is currently accepted by scientists. But that's his idea, is that it's the good, the nature of the good, that shines a light on all of this sort of true reality that our senses don't have immediate access to. And so it's the philosopher's job to kind of get at that real reality. And then he says that it's not just their job just to break out of the cave and see it. They need to go back into the cave and tell other people what's going on. Try to free them, even though when the philosopher goes back in the cave, he sounds like an idiot because he's used to the sunlight, and so Socrates specifically says his eyes are not used to the dark, and so he says these things, and people kind of make fun of him. But that it's really the philosopher who has the real picture of the world. And so he takes a trip back to a city and says that our ideal kings are philosophers, and the philosophers are kings, and they are going to be guardians in this ideal city, and they need to be raised raised from birth to be a philosopher, but not exclusively studying philosophy. So part of his theory is that they need time in practical affairs. So in the previous book, he talked about how they should go into politics or military service, and in this one, he's fleshing that idea out a little bit more. So then in the second half of the video, we started talking about the ideal education for one of these future philosophers. And so he's looking for a few qualities for things to study. The education needs to entail subjects that are both useful for philosophy, but also useful for war. And that was pretty interesting to me. Just this real emphasis on warfare and power, and that's been throughout the whole book. The whole reason we had the city constructed as it was so that we could make war on other cities. And you remember, we didn't really have a great reason for going to war apart from supporting a luxurious lifestyle. And you can kind of debate the ethics of that down in the comment section or wherever you feel like. So we're going through the ideal education right now. So far, he's told us we need mathematics being taught to these future philosophers, and it's at a higher level than just what you need for buying and selling, he says. So they need to contemplate the nature of numbers. And he has this idea in particular about what he calls summoners. So a summoner is a concept, or it's a thing that you see that also contains its opposite somehow. So he said, like, if you look at a finger, all you see is a finger. There's no such thing as the opposite of a finger. So that's an immediate sense perception. But if you look at the number 1, like if this finger represents the number 1, then in order to contemplate the number 1, you have to think of the opposite of the number 1. And in that particular instance, it means like an unlimited number. And so he has these kind of two classes of things that you see and think about. And in his ideal education, he wants things that are summoners and that kind of evoke their own opposites and involve the contemplation of the soul. So he has two subjects that do that. The first is mathematics, because numbers are summoners, and also like they're useful for battle, because you got to know how many like of the enemy there are, I guess, and you got to provision your troops and kind of do all the bureaucratic matters that a lot of warfare actually involves. And then he also starts talking about the importance of geometry, saying for the same reasons it's useful in war, because I guess you're aiming your archers and, I don't know, doing some distance calculations. I've never actually planned a battle. But he says geometry also kind of involves this higher level thinking, and that these Athenian geometers, I'm guessing Euclid was around before this guy, I don't actually know, could see these things with their souls, essentially, and we're basically dealing with these abstractions rather than the specifics. And so it seems very important to him that the subject involves the soul in this way. He also he makes the argument that you need these higher level mathematics in order to be a general. I don't know if I really believe that, but I'm kind of going along with it. And now we're going to see what other subjects have those two qualities of being useful in war and being, I guess, abstract enough to involve the soul in its own contemplation because it somehow contains its opposite. So, I'm sure there are lots of these subjects just lying around waiting for us to study them. So here we go. Back to Socrates. All right, yeah, Glaucon says, let's prescribe geometry as the second subject. Now, Socrates, what about astronomy? Shall we make it the third subject? What do you think? Glaucon, that's fine with me, at least. I mean, a better awareness of the seasons, months, and years is no less appropriate for a general than for a farmer or navigator. Yeah. Tell Napoleon and Hitler. Socrates, you are funny. You are like someone who is afraid that the masses will think he is prescribing useless subjects. It is no inconsequential task. Indeed, it is a very difficult one. To become persuaded that in everyone's soul there is an instrument that is purified and rekindled by such subjects when it has been blinded and destroyed by other pursuits. An instrument that is more important to preserve than 10,000 eyes, since only with it can the truth be seen. Those who share your belief that this is so will think you are speaking incredibly well, while those who are completely unaware of it will probably think you are talking nonsense, since they can see no other benefit worth mentioning in these subjects. So, decide right now which group you are engaging in discussion. Or is it neither of them, and are you making your arguments mostly for your own sake, though you do not begrudge anyone else whatever profit he can get from them? Okay, so we got these two groups of people you can talk to, and it's sort of like philosophers and non-philosophers. So you got the people who know that the soul is important, it's no inconsequential task to become persuaded that in everyone's soul there's an instrument that's purified and rekindled by such subjects. So this is the soul getting these summoners and being like kindled by contemplating abstractions. And he's saying this is kind of how you see things in the intelligible, non-visible world. You remember the magic quadrant that we talked about, and so this kind of internal cognitive instrument is more important than 10,000 eyes could see in this visible world. So he's saying who are you talking? Are you talking to the philosopher who understands that, or are you talking to everybody else? Similar to, are you talking to the people outside the cave who are in the light of the good, or are you talking to the people in the cave who can only see shadows and have no idea what the good is? Okay. Or or are you talking to neither of them, and are you just talking to yourself? That's what I prefer, says Glaucon, to speak, question, and answer mostly for my own sake. Socrates, let's backtrack a bit. You see, we were wrong just now about the subject that comes after geometry. How so? After a plane surface, we went immediately to a solid that was revolving, without taking one just by itself. Is that... I don't know if this is a pun, but I think they went the other plane, like, a two-dimensional plane, if he's talking about planes and solids, Plane. But the right way is to take up the third dimension after the second. And it, I suppose, consists of cubes and of whatever shares in depth. Okay, whatever. I was going to say maybe it shapes in depth, but I guess whatever, shares as in participates in depth. Okay. Yes. Okay, so I think he's saying after two-dimensional geometry, you should do three-dimensional geometry. Sure. Yes, you are right. But Socrates, that subject has not even been investigated yet. There are two reasons for that, says Socrates. Because no city values it, it is not vigorously investigated due to its difficulty. Is this a metaphor? Or is he really just talking about cubes? I don't know, it's like, why don't these cities value the study of cubes? That's what I want to know. Okay. And investigators need a director if they are to discover anything. Now, in the first place, such a director is difficult to find. Second, even if he could be found as things stand now, those who investigate it are too arrogant to obey him. But if an entire city served as his co-director and took the lead in valuing this subject, then they would obey him, and consistent and vigorous investigation would reveal the facts about it. For even now, when it is not valued by the masses and is hampered by investigators who lack any account of its usefulness, all the same, in spite of all these handicaps, the force of its appeal has caused it to be developed. Okay, so it's sort of like you need a scientist, or in this case a geometer, and he's like, well, it's hard to find a good geometer in the first place. Second, or you need like a principal investigator, like a PI, on the research project who's like writing the grant proposal. But he said the problem is everybody else is just too arrogant to obey this guy who's writing the grant. So, yeah, if the entire city served as his co-director and took the lead in valuing the subject, I think it's like if the PI puts all the researchers, like, gives all the other researchers co-author on the paper, then they'll actually listen to him. Okay. So, even though the masses don't value scientific research, it's still developed due to the force of its appeal, he's saying. So it would not be at all surprising if the facts about it were revealed in any case. So even if you don't get, like, this good principal investigator and motivating his researchers, maybe they'll get some kind of rogue researchers who are just doing this for fun. I think that's what he's saying. Yes, indeed, it is an outstandingly appealing subject. But explain more clearly to me what you were saying just now. You took geometry, presumably, as dealing with plane surface. Socrates, yes? So, yeah, that uses the other spelling of plane. I don't know what's going on here. Then at first you put astronomy after it, but later you went back on that. Yes, the more I hurried to get through them all, the slower I went. You see, the subject dealing with the dimension of depth was next. But because of the ridiculous state the investigation of it is in, I passed it by and spoke of astronomy, which deals with the motion of things having depth after geometry. Glaucon, that's right. Let's then prescribe astronomy as the fourth subject on the assumption that solid geometry, which we are now omitting, will be available if the city takes it up. Okay, so I don't know. I guess maybe by this time they're like, okay, we've mastered 2D geometry. 3D geometry is just not in a good state right now. Maybe it'll be discovered, but we don't really know anything about 3D geometry, so just forget it. We'll just go straight to astronomy, and if somebody wants to figure out the theory of cubes, etc., they're welcome to. Glaucon, that seems reasonable. And since you reproached me just now, Socrates, for praising astronomy in a vulgar manner, I will now praise it your way. You see, I think it is clear to everyone that it compels the soul to look upward, and leads it from things here to things there. Isn't that a nice thought? Socrates, it is clear to everyone except me, then, since that is not how I think of it. Ooh, that's an even more interesting thought. So it's like, oh, astronomy makes your soul look up and contemplate things. Socrates is like, no, that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about the good. I'm not talking about the stars. Then how do you think of it? As it is handled today by those who teach philosophy, it makes the soul look very much downward. I don't know what he means, but I think it's very interesting. Glaucon, how do you mean? Socrates, in my opinion, your conception of higher studies is a good deal too generous. I mean, if someone were looking at something by leaning his head back and studying ornaments on a ceiling, it seems as though you would say that he is looking at them with his understanding, not with his eyes. Maybe you are right, and I am foolish. You see, I just cannot conceive of any subject making the soul look upward except the one that is concerned with what is, and that is invisible. Isn't this interesting? If anyone tries to learn something about perceptible things, whether by gaping upward or squinting downward, I would say that he never really learns, since there is no knowledge to be had of such things, and that his soul is not looking up but down, whether he does his learning lying on his back, on land, or on sea. Wow. Okay, because even now, we got all these astronomers, we got the kind of pseudo-philosophers like Carl Sagan, or even Stephen Hawking kind of weighs in on stuff that doesn't really have anything to do with physics. Or Neil deGrasse Tyson, oh man, all the stars, it really makes you think about the nature of reality and how small we are, etc. That's your soul looking up. And Socrates is saying, no. All that stuff you're still seeing with your eyes. You're completely missing the point. The true learning and the truth is behind anything that you actually can perceive with your eyes. And I don't know, that's just, I like how kind of counterintuitive that is. But it's consistent with everything that he said before about the nature of this true knowledge. Okay. Glaucon, a fair judgment. I mean, this is just so not mythological in the sense that, this doesn't just seem like he's telling a fairy tale or a myth and the stars are put there by these people and it means this and that's the higher nature of everything. It's so far from that. He's like, no, you see it with your eyes. That's not any more valid than looking at this hat. And everything I just told you about, you can never know the true nature of the hat. It's just the shadow on the wall. The stars are just more shadows. We don't know what's behind them. Okay, Glaucon, a fair judgment. You are right to reproach me. But what did you mean, then, when you said that astronomy must be learned in a different way than people learn it at present, if it is going to be useful with regard to what we are talking about? Socrates, it is like this. These ornaments in the heavens, since they are ornaments in something visible, may certainly be regarded as having the most beautiful and the most exact motions that such things can have. But these fall far short of the true ones, those motions in which the things that are really fast or really slow, as measured in true numbers and as forming all the true geometrical figures, are moved relative to one another, and that move the things that are in them. And these, of course, must be grasped by reason and thought, not by sight. Don't you agree? Okay, so he's talking about motion, thought motion somehow, and I think really just saying, look, you see Mars moving around, or I don't know, the moon or whatever. That's not. We don't know what's really fast and really slow there. We need to talk about motion in the abstract world and among these true geometrical figures. Remember, kind of pure math and pure geometry belong to this Platonic world of forms, and now he wants to talk about kind of Platonic motion. You with me? Glaucon, of course. Socrates. Therefore, we should use the ornaments in the heavens as models to help us study these other things. It is just as if someone chanced to find diagrams by Daedalus or some other craftsman or painter, which were very carefully drawn and worked out. I mean, anyone experienced in geometry who saw such things would consider them to be very beautifully executed, I suppose. But he would think it ridiculous to examine them seriously in order to find there the truth about equals, doubles, or any other ratio. Glaucon, how could it be anything but ridiculous? Okay, so I think he's saying here, it's like the stars that we see, again, that's no better than just making figures in the sand. It can help you understand some kind of truth about something. I mean, maybe in this case, might be going too far. This would be kind of physical law as one of these abstract fields. So kind of pure mathematics, pure geometry, kind of pure physics. But the things themselves are just like, in this case he talks about Daedalus, who I think was an engineer and artist. It's like, I think the myth of the Minotaur or something I think he built the labyrinth. Somebody can correct me down in the comments section. But he's saying just as if you've like stumbled upon one of his drawings, it's like that's not the truth. Like, it looks really beautiful. Maybe you can learn from it, but maybe not. Oh yeah, it would be ridiculous to examine them seriously for the truth about equals, doubles, or any other ratio. Like, it's not pure reasoning, it's just like a painting. Okay. Socrates. Don't you think, then, that a real astronomer will feel the same way when he looks at the motions of the stars? He will believe that the craftsmen of the heavens arrange them, and all that is in them, in the most beautiful way possible for such things. But as for the ratio of night to day, of these to a month, of a month to a year, or of the motions of the stars to them or to each other, don't you think he will consider it strange to believe that they are always the same and never deviate in the least, since they are connected to body and are visible things, or to seek by every means possible to grasp the truth about them? Okay, so I think he's saying here, he's like, look, stars and everything, yeah, that's beautiful, but the ratios between things don't actually mean anything. It's just like, yeah, the moon orbits every 28 days and the Earth orbits every 365 days. These aren't kind of eternal numbers. They just happen to belong to these particular bodies that are, in the whatever heavens. Glaucon, that's what I think. Anyway, now that I hear it from you. Socrates. Just as in geometry, then, it is by making use of problems that we will pursue astronomy too. We will leave the things in the heavens alone if we are really going to participate in astronomy and make the naturally wise element in the soul useful instead of useless. Okay, this is interesting. So he's saying, yeah, to kind of study true astronomy doesn't have anything to do with the Jupiter or the particular things you see. I think he's talking about kind of pure physical law would be the true astronomy. Like, you're not interested in how far the Earth is to the sun. What you're interested in is the gravitational constant. I think that would be an interpretation of this, but we'll keep going with it. Okay, the task you are prescribing is a lot greater than anything now attempted in astronomy. Socrates. And I suppose we will prescribe other subjects in the same way if we are to be of any benefit as lawgivers. But, can you in fact suggest any other appropriate subjects? Okay, math, geometry, astronomy, in their purest forms. Not at the moment, anyway. But motion, it seems to me, says Socrates, presents itself not just in one form, but in several. A wise person could probably list them all, but there are two that are evident even to us. What are they? Besides the one we have discussed, there is also its counterpart. What is that? It is probable that as the eyes fasten on astronomical motions, so the ears fasten on harmonic ones, and that these two sciences are somehow akin, as the Pythagoreans say. And we agree, Glaucon, don't we? Oh, are these like the theory of the celestial spheres? I don't know if that's Plato, but one of these Greek guys said that, okay, all that stuff you see in the heavens, like they're each, like the moon and Jupiter and the sun, they're each part of the sphere, and they're rotating, and they're making these perfect, like, perfectly harmonious sounds as they go along. Or like each one has a tone, and then each taken together they make harmony or something. Something really stupid. Okay, but the Pythagoreans argued for this somehow. Alright, Glaucon, we do. Then, since the task is so huge, shouldn't we ask them their opinion and whether they have anything to add, all the while guarding our own requirement? What's that? That those we will be rearing should never attempt to learn anything incomplete, anything that does not always come out at the place all things should reach, the one we mentioned just now in the case of astronomy. Or don't you know that people do something similar with harmony too? They measure audible concordances in sound against one another, and so labor in vain, just like astronomers. Okay, so I think he's saying that just as the true astronomer shouldn't really care about, like, the visible stars, or like the particular stars, so the true musicologist isn't using his or her senses and studying these audible, not doing little experiments with sound and saying, oh, these two sound good together. They got to use reason to get it pure music. I think that's what he's saying. Glaucon. Yes, by the gods. And pretty ridiculous they are, too. They talk about something they call a dense interval, or quarter tone, putting their ears to their instruments like someone trying to overhear what the neighbors are saying. It's pretty funny. And some say they hear a tone in between, and that it is the shortest interval by which they must measure, while others argue that this tone sounds the same as a quarter tone. I love the idea of these guys with these things in their ears being like, no, that's definitely a different tone. Like, no, that's these two are the same, man. Like, no, they're different. I'm telling you, they're different. Okay, I'll look at the footnote here. I don't know a ton about music, but if I can click. Come on. A dense interval is evidently the smallest difference in pitch that was recognized in ancient music. Okay. That's not the most useful. Alright, both groups put ears before the understanding. Okay, got it. Yeah, so as the sight is related to astronomy, so the ears are related to music, and we want the pure version that doesn't involve the eyes or ears. You mean those excellent fellows, says Socrates, who vex their strings, torturing them and stretching them on pegs. I won't draw out the analogy by speaking of blows with the pick, or the charges laid against strings that are too responsive or too unresponsive. Instead, I will drop the analogy and say that I do not mean these people, but the ones we just said we were going to question about harmonics, so I think the Pythagoreans. You see, they do the same as the astronomers do. I mean, it is in these audible concordances that they search for numbers, but they do not ascend to problems or investigate which numbers are in concord, and which are not, or what the explanation is in each case. Okay. So I think he's saying, these guys looking at harmonics, they're doing little tests with their different instruments, and they're kind of writing down what the differences are, but that's just the same as writing down what their stars are. That doesn't really tell you anything about true astronomy. So I think he's saying true music is related to sort of the true relationship between numbers on this abstract plane. Glaucon. But that would be a demonic task. And that's the same demon we saw, Daimon. That's halfway between a god and a human. Socrates. Yes, It is useful in the search for the beautiful and the good. Pursued for any other purpose, though, it is useless. I suppose so. Moreover, I take it that if the investigation of all the subjects we have mentioned arrives at what they share in common with one another, and what their affinities are, and draws conclusions about their kinship, it does contribute something to our goal and is not labor in vain. But that otherwise, it is in vain. Okay, so all the subjects, I think he's saying they all need to have something in common here. So, yeah, so we got kind of the perceived version of mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and music, and then the abstract version of math, geometry, astronomy, and music. And I think he's saying these four things need to be related, and we need to find some kinships among them. Okay, Glaucon. I have the same hunch myself, but you are still talking about a very great task, Socrates. Socrates. Do you mean the prelude or what? Or don't you know that all these subjects are merely preludes to the theme itself, and must be learned? I mean, you surely do not think that people who are clever in these matters are dialecticians. Yeah, don't think that. Okay. I'm not sure. Wait, what's the prelude? Okay, so you're talking about a very great task. Are you saying the prelude's a great task, or there's a theme? So there he's using a musical analogy or metaphor. I don't know. I'll just keep going with this. No, by Zeus, I do not. Although I have met a few exceptions. Socrates. But did it ever seem to you that those who can neither give an account nor prove one know what any of the things are that we say they must know? Those who can neither give an account nor prove one. I don't know what he's talking about. Again, the answer is no. Then isn't this at last, Glaucon, the theme itself that dialectical discussion sings? It itself is intelligible. Okay, so dialectical discussion is what he's been doing this whole time. And you remember that was kind of the tool used to get at these forms. This dialectical, like, sort of thought and dialectical discussion. Okay, so and then he's got this bit about the prelude and the theme. I'm really not sure what he's talking about there. But he's saying the dialectical discussion is the theme. So it could be, maybe, I'm not really sure here. It could be that those visible things are the prelude, and then the theme are the abstract versions of math, geometry, astronomy, music. And dialectical discussion sings the theme, so sings those abstract versions. Maybe. I don't know. This is one of the more difficult passages, at least for me. Okay. It itself is intelligible, but the power of sight imitates it. We said that sight tries to at last to look at the animals themselves, the stars themselves, and in the end, the sun itself. In the same way, whenever someone tries by means of dialectical discussion, and without the aid of any sense perceptions, to arrive through reason at the being of each thing itself, and does not give up until he grasps what good itself is with understanding itself, he reaches the end of the intelligible realm, just as the other reached the end of the visible one. Okay. So, yeah, okay. So it's you use your senses to kind of work your way up through this visible version of these subjects, and then you use dialectical discussion to work your way up through the invisible or the intelligible version of them. Okay, so I think that's where we are. Glaucon, absolutely. Well then, why don't you call this journey dialectic? I'm going to look up the footnote on journey. Poreia, an aporia, puzzle, problem, literally a blockage on one's journey forward, is what dialectic attempts to solve. Okay. Yeah, it's like you're playing King's Quest and there's something in the path. Like the dialectic clears out the blockage using the right tool. Glaucon, I do. Socrates. Then the release from bonds, and the turning around from shadows to statues and the light. And then the ascent out of the cave to the sun. Okay, I guess we're back in the cave. And there, the continuing inability to look directly at the animals, the plants, and the light of the sun, but instead at divine reflections in water and shadows of the things that are, and not, as before, merely at shadows of statues thrown by another source of light that, when judged in relation to the sun, is as shadowy as they. All this practice of the crafts we mention has the power to lead the best part of the soul upward until it sees the best among the things that are. Just as before, the clearest thing in the body was led to the brightest thing in the bodily and visible world. Okay, so he's talking about these four disciplines leading the fella up, and then kind of bringing it back to this cave metaphor. So he's saying, just as you come out, you still can't look directly at the sun, but you're outside the cave and you're looking at divine reflections. So you're looking at shadows and reflections in water outside the cave. And he's saying they're not merely shadows of statues, they are kind of shadows of the real thing. Okay, so that kind of makes some sense. Like everybody who doesn't know anything, they're looking at not only shadows, but shadows of fake things. I think maybe that was kind of the key too. It wasn't like Abraham Lincoln's actual shadow. It was just some guy holding his hand to make it look like Abraham Lincoln. And then when you come out into the sun, at least when you're using these four magical disciplines of math, geometry, astronomy, and music, then you can at least see the shadow of the real thing. So you're getting closer. I think that's what he's saying here. Glaucon. I accept that this is so. And yet, I think it is very difficult to accept. Although, in another way, difficult not to accept. All the same, since the present occasion is not our only opportunity to hear these things, but we will get to return to them often in the future, let's assume that what you said about them just now is true, and turn to the theme itself, and discuss in the same way as we did the prelude. Okay, I guess that was all the prelude. I'm still confused about this theme and prelude stuff. So tell us then, in what way the power of dialectical discussion works, into what kinds it is divided, and what roads it follows. I mean, it is these, it seems, that would lead us at last, to that place which is a rest from the road, so to speak, for the one who reaches it, and an end of his journey. Okay, so I guess it is, the visible stuff is the prelude, the invisible stuff is the theme, and really the theme is dialectical discussion, is how you discover the nature of pretty much everything intelligible, i.e. not visible. So he's going to get into the actual nature of dialectical discussion. The dialectic. It is interesting that this sort of ultimate reality is accessible not through these sense perceptions, as he says, or even kind of mathematically or scientifically, because we're not really validating against perceptions. Instead, it's a world of pure language, and we've kind of seen before how language has shaped reality inside of this ideal city. We had the myths shaping people's perceptions, and then we had he kind of drew attention to different words that we would be using, and saying, well, we can call this, and we call that, or like in particular the mothers and fathers or sons and daughters. We say, oh, well, we will, assign the appellation mother and father to this thing that's not really biologically, but we get people to believe it, and then that becomes their reality. So I think it's just interesting to me that reality and the relationship between reality and language comes back here in the most rarefied area of knowledge. Okay, Socrates. You won't be able to follow me any farther, my dear Glaucon, though not because of any lack of eagerness on my part. You would no longer see an image of what we are describing, but the truth itself, as it seems to me, at least. Whether it is really so or not, that's not something on which it is any longer worth insisting. But that there is some such thing to be seen, that is something on which we must insist. Isn't that so? Glaucon, of course. Socrates. Mustn't we also insist that the power of dialectical discussion could reveal it only to someone experienced in the subjects we described and cannot do so in any other way? Okay, so he says, we're going to try to get at the truth, but I don't know if you can see the truth. I don't think you can follow me to the truth, Glaucon. But you got to believe me that it's there. And Glaucon, who maybe he's I don't know. The Glaucon's kind of the reader for some parts, but then in my esoteric interpretation I gave you, I say he kind of cleaves from the reader, and we gotta become our own man/woman, or become our own philosopher at any rate. And yeah, so I get the sense Socrates is leaving us behind too, but we'll see where he goes. And he says, the person, we can reveal it only to someone experienced in those four subjects. And this book, The Republic, does not include a book of geometry, mathematics, astronomy, and music. So maybe we'll get left behind with Glaucon while Socrates ascends into the heavens. Glaucon, yes, that is worth insisting on too. Socrates, at the very least, no one will dispute our claim by arguing that there is another road of inquiry that tries to acquire a systematic and wholly general grasp of what each thing is itself. By contrast, all the other crafts are concerned with human beliefs and appetites, with growing or construction, or with the care of growing or constructed things. Now this is interesting because it's kind of like getting obsessed again with people's professions, and he's just saying there's no other existing profession that is concerned with the things that he's concerned with. So like that's his way of proving that this is the only road. Intellectually, it doesn't make any sense, because like maybe there's another intellectual path to what he's getting to, but I don't know. He's fixated on the farmers and ships captains and doctors and builders. As for the rest, we describe them as to some extent grasping what is. What? We describe them as to some extent. Okay, so the rest are grasping at what is. I mean geometry and the subjects that follow it. Okay, and there are people who do those things. There are professional geometers in ancient Athens. For we saw that while they do dream about what is, they cannot see it while wide awake, as long as they make use of hypotheses that they leave undisturbed, and for which they cannot give any account. After all, when the first principle is unknown, and the conclusion and the steps in between are put together out of what is unknown, what mechanism could possibly turn any agreement reached in such cases into knowledge? Okay, so I think this kind of goes back to like Euclid's Elements. You got his 5, are they axioms or postulates? I guess they're postulates. It's been a long time. But for all this mathematics to proceed, you need assumptions. And it's like, I forgot what the Euclid ones are. The most famous one is the 5th one that says 2 parallel lines will never meet. And you could, I guess people for a long time were trying to prove that you didn't need that one really. Turns out you do, and you get Euclidean geometry, but then if you get rid of it, then you get non-Euclidean geometry. Anyway, what it means is that the conclusions follow from the hypotheses. So if you don't use the parallel line hypothesis or axiom or postulate, then you get one type of geometry, and then if you do use it, you get a completely different type of geometry. And so the conclusions are dependent on the hypotheses. Nobody knows where the hypotheses come from. It's just that's just how math works. Like, yeah, we just assume this and assume that, and here's everything that follows. But there's no validation of those hypotheses or assumptions. Glaucon, none. Socrates, therefore, dialectic is the only investigation that, doing away with hypotheses, journeys to the first principle itself in order to be made secure. Okay, so I think he's getting back to the stuff at the end of Book 6 that I found really confusing. Where he's like, here's stuff with hypotheses and unknown first principles, and I had no clue what he was talking about. It's a little more clear now that we have the mathematical analogy, only because I'm a little bit familiar with mathematics. And so, yeah, I can see at least the difference between something that proceeds axiomatically and then, at least hypothetically, something that does not depend on assumptions. I don't know if you're actually going to get anywhere without assumptions. I just, like, at some level you gotta assume you're not in the cave or not in the Matrix to get anywhere, I think. But I don't really know. I think there's a whole field of metaphysics dedicated to that. Okay. And when the eye of the soul is really buried in a sort of barbaric bog, dialectic gently pulls it out and leads it upward, using the crafts we described to help it and cooperate with it in turning the soul around. From force of habit, we have often called these branches of knowledge, but they need another name, since they are clearer than belief and darker than knowledge. Okay, you remember that spectrum we had from one of these books, book 5, I think, where we had, it's like, here's knowledge, or here's ignorance, and here's knowledge, and then there's belief in between, and now we have something between. It's going to go ignorance, belief, new word, knowledge. We distinguished the term thought somewhere before, but I don't suppose we will dispute about names with matters as important as those before us to investigate. I don't know. Names seem pretty important for all the reasons discussed. And I don't know if that means let's not dispute them because they're not important in this important matter is almost like, I think that's his way of kind of winning this little argument. So sort of without disputation, he can get his language put into place. And so maybe one way to look at that is those are the hypotheses or axioms or postulates that kind of underpin the dialectic. So the choice of language, the choice of words. And so in that sense, maybe it's not any better than geometry. And I think that's kind of Wittgenstein's point, who I mentioned before. I'm not super familiar with his work, but he's one of his big ideas is the word game. And you say that you come up with words and have rules for the words interacting, and then maybe all philosophy is just kind of this game being played with sort of agreed upon concepts, because you sort of skip over that definition because you're like, oh, this is so important, let's not argue about the name here. Glaucon. Of course not. Just as long as they express the state of clarity the soul possesses. Socrates. What a beautiful thought. It will be satisfactory, then, to do what we did before and call the first section knowledge, the second thought, the third opinion, and the fourth imagination. Okay, so I think this is from the Magic Quadrant that we had. Is that right? Yeah, I think this is from the Magic Quadrant. Because we was like, oh, here are these four things that correspond to these four. We had like the two sections of the line and then the subsections of the line. Okay, so it's like, remember, it's like visible, invisible, images, no images. Okay, so let's see how he defines these now. The last two together we call belief, the other two understanding. Okay, and so before belief dealt with the visible world? No, with the with the image world. So I think that'd be the images. Okay, the last two together. So the last two are imagination and opinion. First two are knowledge and thought. Okay, we might actually be able to flesh out the rubric here. Okay, and the other two, understanding. So knowledge and thought constitute understanding. So I'm going to guess it's intelligible world is understanding, and then the one with images is thought, because it's darker than knowledge, and the one without images is knowledge. So I think that's kind of the purest sort of mental activity is knowledge, I think. So intelligible, no images, knowledge. Intelligible images, thought. Visible images, imagination. Visible, no images, opinion. That's my guess here. Okay, let's keep going and see what he says. Belief is concerned with becoming. Understanding with being. Oh boy. Yeah, anytime you see the word becoming, just like run away. it's like all like Hegel is about, and nobody really understands Hegel. And as being is to becoming, so understanding is to belief. And as understanding is to belief, so knowledge is to belief and thought to imagination. Good God. Okay, so as understanding is to belief, so the first two were understanding. So these top two are understanding. So he's saying as understanding is to belief, so understanding dealing with the intelligible world, belief dealing with the visible world. Is that right? Yes. So as that relationship holds, so knowledge is to belief and thought to imagination. So knowledge... Wait, I thought that was just one of the things up here. Okay, yeah, so as understanding is to belief, so knowledge, this one here, is to belief. And thought, which was also up here, dealing with images, is related to imagination. Okay, I'm with him so far. Did you get all that? Alright, just draw out the quadrants and it'll make sense. Okay. And that's the same as being is to becoming. If you backtrack a little bit there. So being is up here. Being is the intelligible world, not accessible to the sight. Becoming is the intelligible, or is the visible world that you can see and hear. Okay. So that's why belief is concerned with becoming. I think that's what we're talking about here. Whew. Okay, and then at another level, being, if it's eternal, it doesn't decay, then you think of it as he's drawn a distinction between that and kind of temporal objects or things that come into being and decay. So you can think of them more as like mortal or temporal, which starts to parallel some Christian teachings with kind of like the church militant and church ecclesiastical. I forgot exactly how it works, but there's like basically there's heaven and then there's earth, and those are kind of the two important domains. And Plato was very popular among medieval scholasticists. Okay, let's keep plowing here. But as for the ratios between the things these deal with, and the division of either the believable or the intelligible section into two, let's pass them by, Glaucon, in case they involve us in discussions many times longer than the ones we've already gone through. Okay, so the division of the believable or the intelligible into two. Yeah, let's not argue about how much heaven versus how much earth there is. I think that's what he's saying there. Glaucon, I agree with you about the rest of them anyway, insofar as I am able to follow. Socrates, so don't you too call someone a dialectician when he is able to grasp an account of the being of each thing? And when he cannot do so, won't you too say that to the extent that he cannot give an account of something either to himself or to another, to that extent he does not understand it? Okay, and the being deals with the eternal aspects of things, and that's what he said the philosophers have access to. And I think he was talking about that when he was at the beginning of the book, when he's talking about coming out of the cave. And okay, and so it's all about giving an account, and there's language coming back in, which is interesting because language is ultimately a social activity. Like, there's no private language. I think that was a point of Wittgenstein. Well, maybe I'm just spouting nonsense at this point. If you know a lot about Wittgenstein, feel free to fill me in down below. I will definitely read what you have to say. But I think it's interesting. It's not like this pure languageless thought where you access truth and these eternal things. It's through language. It's through these words that are human inventions and invented, by people who didn't necessarily know a lot about or think about philosophy. It's just whatever we use to come out of the state of nature. Okay, Glaucon, how could I not? Socrates, then the same applies to the good. Unless someone can give an account of the form of the good, distinguishing it from everything else, and can survive all examination as if in a battle, striving to examine things not in accordance with belief but in accordance with being, and can journey through all that with his account still intact, he will say that he does not know the good itself or any other good whatsoever. And if he does manage to grasp some image of it, you will say that it is through belief, not knowledge, that he grasps it, that he is dreaming and asleep throughout his present life, and that before he wakes up here, he will arrive in Hades and go to sleep forever. Whew! So this is kind of a chilling passage here. Wow, okay, I'm going to go back through that. So unless they can give an account of the form of the good, and I love this, I like this battle imagery. We saw that before. We saw that in Book 1, actually. When he's talking to Polemarchus, he says, Polemarchus, I finally convinced you. Will you, stand with me and go to battle with anyone who says that justice is helping your friends and hurting your enemies? And Polemarchus is like, yes, Socrates, I will go into battle with you. And so my criticism at the time was that didn't seem like the activity of pure reason here. That seemed kind of tribalistic, and militaristic. But Socrates is saying that's the nature of truth, is surviving examination as if in a battle. So you actually do need to kind of band together and go to war with these other beliefs. Isn't that interesting? All right, so that kind of ties it back, or ties up that loose end in my mind. So what he's saying is all this stuff that looks political, and also all this war. If you think of, Clausewitz said, politics is war by other means. This is all tied up in the nature of true knowledge, at least conceptually. Okay, so if he can survive these examinations as if in a battle, and starting to examine things not in accordance with belief, it's all the junk down here, but in accordance with being, all the stuff up here, and can journey all that with this account still intact, you will say that he does not know the good itself or any other good whatsoever. What? Oh, okay. So unless he can do that, this is just a very, very complicated sentence construction. So don't miss that unless at the beginning. Okay, and if he does grasp some image of it, there's that image. You will say it is through belief, not knowledge, that he grasped it. So the stuff down here, not the stuff up here. Yeah, so as long as you're still using images, you're dreaming and asleep through your present life. Isn't that a great image? I mean, that's an image, right? So how do we know that this is true knowledge? Maybe he's giving us another dream. Before he wakes up, he will arrive in Hades and go to sleep forever. Whew. Gave me the chills. Glaucon, yes, by Zeus, I will certainly say all that. Then, says Socrates, as for those children of yours, the ones you are rearing and educating in your discussion, so the future philosophers, if you ever reared them in fact, don't suppose that, while they are still as irrational as the proverbial lines, you would allow them to rule in your city or control the greatest things. Proverbial lines, is that like a geometric reference? A pun made possible by the fact that allegon can mean irrational as applied to people, and incommensurable as applied to lines in geometry. Whew! That pun went right over my head. Okay, so if you ever reared them, as long as they're irrational, don't allow them to rule in the city. No, of course not. Won't you prescribe in your legislation, says Socrates, that they are to give the most attention to the education that will enable them to ask and answer questions most knowledgeably? I will prescribe it together with you. Doesn't it seem to you, then, that dialectic is just like a capstone we have placed on top of the subjects, and that no other subject can rightly be placed above it, but that our account of the subjects has now come to an end? Alright. He's like, that's it. That's all there is to say about subjects. The dialectic is the ultimate form of knowing and truth, and nothing else can touch it. Glaucon, it does. Then it remains for you to deal with the distribution of these subjects, to whom we will assign them, and in what way. Clearly. Do you remember what sort of people we chose in our earlier selection of rulers? How could I not? Yeah, what... I forgot how we chose them. Was that where he's like, no petty-minded people? Well then, as regards the other requirements too, you must suppose that these same natures are to be chosen, since we have to select the most secure, the most courageous, and, as far as possible, the best looking. Oh gosh. Really, the best looking? Really, Socrates? In addition, we must look not only for people who have a noble and valiant character, but for those who also have natural qualities conducive to this education of ours. Okay. Which ones in particular, says Glaucon. They must be keen on the subjects, bless you, and learn them without difficulty. For people's souls are much more likely to give up during strenuous studies than during physical training. The pain is more their own, you see, since it is peculiar to them and not shared with the body. What? Okay. That's a weird argument. Like, oh, my body doesn't feel my mental pain from studying, so it's more acute, and I quit. Falcon, that's true. We must also look for someone who has a good memory, is persistent, and is wholeheartedly in love with hard work. I think he's talked about all these before, except maybe hard work. I mean, he said it will be hard work. I don't think he said we need someone who loves hard work. How else do you suppose he would be willing to carry out such hard physical labors and also complete so much learning and training? Glaucon. He would not. Not unless his nature were an entirely good one. Aww. Socrates. In any case, the mistake made at present, which, as we said before, explains why philosophy has fallen into dishonor, is that unworthy people take it up. Hate 'em. For illegitimate people should not have taken it up, but genuine ones. How do you mean? In the first place, the one who takes it up must not be half-hearted in his love of hard work, with one half of him loving hard work and the other shirking it. That is what happens when someone is a lover of physical training, and a lover of hunting, and a lover of all kinds of hard bodily labor. Yet is not a lover of learning, a lover of listening, or a keen investigator, but hates the work involved in all such things. So, okay, so he's saying, like, maybe you have someone who just loves training and hunting and all this other stuff, like the particulars, but they don't love work in itself. So you need, like, the true workaholic who will take work in any form, no matter what. And someone whose love of hard work tends in the opposite direction is also defective. I guess someone who maybe the workaholic isn't right. I don't know. Or he means someone who's a lover of learning and listening and is a keen investigator, but not a lover of physical training, hunting, and bodily labor. So you need someone. I think he's saying you need someone who loves hard work, mental and physical. Glaucon. That's absolutely true. Socrates. Similarly, with regard to truth, won't we say that a soul is maimed if it hates a voluntary lie, cannot endure to have one in itself, and is greatly angered when others lie, but is nonetheless content to accept an involuntary lie, does not get irritated when it is caught being ignorant, and bears its ignorance easily, wallowing in it like a pig? Okay. So we had this relationship between the truth and the ideal philosopher before, I think in book 5? I think book 5. Where it's like, yeah, the disposition of the philosopher should be someone who hates falsehood in all its forms. And I pointed out before, that seemed to be a contradiction, because if you're putting the philosophers in charge of the ideal city leaders are just lying all the time. Or they're lying to the guardians, they're lying to everybody else. They're like, oh yeah, you're made of metals. And like, oh yeah, that's your daughter. So that just seemed like a blatant contradiction to me. Now he's qualifying this somewhat. He's saying we want someone who hates a voluntary lie, but is content to accept an involuntary one, which means being ignorant. And I said before, part of my case before about a lie was I thought it had to be intentional, but maybe not. I'm not sure what the Greek word was and whether a lie actually just means falsehood or it means something deliberate. Okay, so in any event, he's greatly angered when others lie. But so I don't know who's telling the myth then, unless it's just like, oh, we just received this thing. No one told us because they're all dead. Glaucon, absolutely. And with regard to temperance, courage, high-mindedness, and all the other parts of virtue too, we must be especially on our guard to distinguish the illegitimate from the genuine. You see, when private individuals or cities do not know how to investigate all these things fully, they unwittingly employ defectives and illegitimates as their friends or rulers for whatever services they happen to need. Okay, so yeah, we need those virtues, or we have to be on guard to make sure we have the right ones. And you do recall, in Book 1, he said sometimes you don't know who your real friends are or your real enemies, you don't know who the good people are or the bad people, and that's just a condition of being. Like, you're just never going to know the truth about some people. And now he's just like, oh, well, we'll just got to be on guard for that stuff and hope for the best. But if you do make an error, then do you end up building, the non-ideal city? I think that's like, for me, that's the key political question here, or one of the key questions is, what is this role of error, which kind of disappeared for too long from the book. Glaucon, yes, that's just what happens. So, we must take good care in all these matters, since, if we bring people who are sound of limb and mind to so important a subject, and train and educate them in it, justice itself will not find fault with us, and we will save both the city and its constitution. Yay! But if we bring people of a different sort to it, we will achieve precisely the opposite. Thank you, and let loose an even greater flood of ridicule upon philosophy as well. Yeah, I love how that's like the greatest evil that can occur. It's not like, oh yeah, we'll have the wrong people in charge, and they'll just use the city for their own corrupt ends. It's like, yeah, people will respect philosophy even less than they do now. Okay, and the prescription is just take good care. It's like, there's no real solution here. It's just like, oh yeah, just be careful. Try not to screw anything up. There's no like system in place to prevent errors. Glaucon, that would be a shame. Socrates, it certainly would. But I seem to have made myself a little ridiculous just now. In what way? Socrates, I forgot we were playing and spoke too vehemently. You see, while I was speaking, I looked upon philosophy, and when I saw it undeservedly showered with abuse, I suppose I got irritated, and, as if I were angry with those responsible, I said what I had to say in too serious a manner. Isn't that interesting? So, here's Socrates kind of being human. So he's supposed to be this, philosopher-king man. And in fact, he spent all this time in one of these books saying, well, the philosopher is godlike because the philosopher is spending all his time pondering the rational and the orderly and the proportionate and the beautiful. And so his soul starts to imitate the things it's exposed to. So his soul becomes more rational and beautiful and proportionate. And thereby he becomes more godlike. And not only that, he's going to wipe the city clean. He's going to wipe people's minds clean as a slate and then paint them to be more beautiful and rational because only the philosopher can. And here he is popping off. He's getting angry. He can't escape his own human nature. That's fascinating to me because this seems like maybe another big hint that the stuff he's talking about is crazy, right? Or at least is impossible in this world. Because I said, there's no changing human nature here. And here he is holding himself up to be Mr. Rationality, true belief, knowledge man, and he can't help himself when his ego is threatened because people say bad things about philosophy. It makes him angry, and he loses these kind of godlike characteristics, or this even temper, the reason being in charge of his appetites, or at least his righteous indignation. So yeah, this is a moment, like, Plato didn't have to write this into the script, right? I don't think anything here is accidental. And so I would treat this moment as being very important. Because this is sort of, at the literary level, when we're talking with these characters kind of talking amongst each other, that's sort of the most real thing that we have in the entire book. So it can be Socrates talking to Cephalus at the very beginning, or them encountering one another after this festival. That stuff is real. That's kind of written as the real world that you and I inhabit. And all this other stuff, it's kind of this mind world inside of Socrates' head. And so this is one of the moments where we kind of break out of the philosophy back into the real world, and that gives us something that might contradict the stuff that we had already been told. So yeah, that's really, really fascinating to me. Okay, I'll keep going here. Glaucon, not too serious for me, by Zeus, as a member of the audience. Socrates, but too serious for me as the speaker. Interesting, because that's kind of bringing the reader back up again. And Glaucon's kind of been this reader surrogate, and he kind of almost says that, like, oh, I'm just a reader here. I'm a member of the audience. In any case, let's not forget that in our earlier selection, we chose older people, but here that is not permitted. Okay, yeah, because we had the philosophers needed to enter politics or the military for a while, and then when their muscles start failing, then they turn to and graze in the pastures of philosophy. You see, we must not believe Solon when he says that as someone grows older, he is able to learn a lot. On the contrary, he is even less able to learn than to run. Okay, yeah, don't tell the retirees that I know that. It is to young people that all great and frequent labors properly belong. Glaucon, necessarily so. Socrates, well then, calculation, geometry, and all the preparatory education that serves as preparation for dialectic must be offered to them in childhood, and not in the shape of compulsory instruction either. Why is that? Because a free person should learn nothing slavishly. For while compulsory physical labors do no harm to the body, no compulsory instruction remains in the soul. Ooh. Probably something there, although I kind of remember a lot of random facts that I learned in, ancient world history in 8th grade, which was compulsory. Glaucon, that's true. Well then, do not use compulsion, my very good man, to train the children in these subjects. Use play instead. That way you will also be able to better see what each of them is naturally suited for. Alright, he's a little pedagogical theorist here, too. What you say makes sense. Don't you remember that we also said that the children were to be led into war on horseback as observers? Yes. And that, wherever it is safe, they should be brought to the front and given a taste of blood, just like young dogs. I don't remember that exact image of taste of blood. I feel like I would have remembered that. But, okay. And there are those dogs again. I do remember. Those who always show the greatest facility in dealing with all these labors, studies, and fears must be enrolled in a unit. Okay. So I guess the people who love hard work in all its forms, physical and mental, and want to study all these things voluntarily and aren't afraid to go into battle, we need to get all of them together at the youngest possible age. Well, at what age, says Glaucon? After they are released from compulsory physical training. For, during that period, whether it is 2 or 3 years, they are incapable of doing anything else, since weariness and sleep are enemies of learning. At the same time, one of the important tests of each of them is how he fares in physical training. Okay, so it's like you can't be doing the physical and mental training at the same time. Sorry, Batman. Falcon, it certainly is. Socrates. Then, after that period, those selected from among the 20-year-olds will receive greater honors than the others. Moreover, the subjects they learned in no particular order in their education as children, they must now bring together into a unified vision of their kinship with one another and with the nature of what is. Whew. Okay, so you're raising them up, they meet all the criteria, they're learning, they're doing their preparatory education for what is, and have this vision of kinship. Beautiful. That, at any rate, is the only instruction that remains secure in those who receive it. Socrates. It is also the greatest test of which nature is dialectical and which is not. For the person who can achieve a unified vision is dialectical, the one who can't isn't. Okay, and he's mentioned this a little bit before. Remember when he's talking about petty-mindedness? He's like, oh, we need a guy who's not petty-minded. He's got to see the whole nature of things. Like me, Socrates. And that kind of comes back here. He's like, oh, he's not concerned with details. He doesn't know the Mixolydian scale. He's a big picture guy. He's got the dialectical nature. Glaucon, I agree. Socrates, well then, you will have to look out for those among them who most possess that quality, who are resolute in their studies, and also resolute in war, and the other things conventionally expected of them. And when they have passed their 30th year, you will have to select them in turn from among those selected earlier and assign them yet greater honors, and test them by means of the power of dialectical discussion to see which of them can relinquish his eyes and other senses and travel on in the company of truth to what itself is. It's like getting your PhD in pure truth. And here, comrade, you have a task that needs a lot of safeguarding. How so? Don't you realize the harm caused by dialectical discussion as it is currently practiced? Uh-oh, we got like fake dialectic. What harm? Its practitioners are filled with lawlessness. They certainly are. Do you think it is at all surprising that this happens to them? Aren't you sympathetic? Why should I be? It's like the case of a supposititious? Supposititious. I have never seen this word. Supposititious. Substituted for the real thing, not genuine. Okay, it is like the case of the supposititious child, brought up amid large wealth, a great and powerful family, and many flatterers, who finds out, when he has become a man, that he is not the child of his professed parents and that he cannot discover his real ones. Do you have any hunch as to what his attitude would be to the flatterers and to his supposed parents during the time when he did not know about the exchange, and on the other hand, when he did know? Or would you rather hear my hunch? I would. Socrates. Well then, my hunch is that he would be more likely to honor his father, his mother, and the rest of his supposed family than the flatterers. Less likely to overlook any of their needs, less likely to treat them lawlessly in word or deed, and less likely to disobey them than the flatterers. Terters of importance? Maybe that's in matters of importance? In the time when he did not know the truth. Okay, so you got this changeling, and he honors his parents better when he thinks that they're actually his parents, and not his adoptive parents. Probably so. Socrates. But when he became aware of the truth, on the other hand, my hunch is that he would withdraw his honor and devotion from his family and increase them for the flatterers, whom he would obey far more than before, and he would begin to live the way they did, spend time with them openly, and, unless he was thoroughly good by nature, care nothing for that father of his or any of the rest of his supposed family. Yeah, you're not my real dad. I'm going to go hang out with my friends. Glaucon. All that would probably happen, as you say. But how is it like the case of those who take up argument? As follows. I take it we hold from childhood convictions about what things are just and fine. We are brought up with them, as with our parents. We obey and honor them. Okay. Yeah, childhood convictions. Yes, we do. And there are also other practices opposite to those, which possess pleasures that flatter our soul and attract it to themselves, but which do not persuade people who are at all moderate, who continue to honor and obey the convictions of their fathers. Okay. So, other things besides convictions? So, practice and convictions you have from childhood, and if you're moderate, you're not persuaded. Glaucon, that's right. What happens then when someone of that sort is met by the question, what is the fine? And when he answers what he has heard from the traditional lawgiver, the argument refutes him. Uh-oh. And by refuting him often, and in many ways, reduces him to the belief that the fine is no more fine than shameful, and the same with the just, the good, and the things he honored most. What do you think he will do after that about honoring and obeying his earlier convictions? It's like, uh-oh, my childhood convictions aren't standing up to the dialectic. It is inevitable that he won't honor or obey them in the same way. Maybe. Some people still are not convinced. Glaucon. Okay. Socrates. Then, when he no longer regards them as honorable or as his own kin, the way he did before, and cannot discover the true ones, will he be likely to adopt any other sort of life than the one that flatters him? Ah, okay. Yeah, these convictions aren't any good. I'm going to adopt beliefs that make me feel best about myself. That actually is pretty true. Glaucon, no he won't. And so he will be taken, I suppose, to have changed from being law-abiding to being lawless. Inevitably. Isn't it likely, then, that this is what will happen to people who take up argument in that way, and as I said just now, don't they deserve a lot of sympathy? Yes, and pity, too. Okay, I mean, you could take it like you grow up in one religion, and then someone talks, like you go to college, and somebody talks you out of it, and then you're just like, yeah, I'm going to hang out with these flatterers now, and become lawless. Yeah, I'm going to smoke cigarettes. Do all this stuff that was forbidden to me. They deserve sympathy and pity, too. Then, if you do not want your 30-year-olds to be objects of such pity, won't you have to employ every sort of precaution when they take up argument? Yes, indeed. Okay, so if they're taking up argument, and this this happened to one of my college roommates, showed up to college and took up argument, i.e. philosophy, and lost all religion. You gotta watch out for that. It can happen. Yes, indeed. Socrates. And isn't one very effective precaution not to let them taste argument while they are young? I mean, I don't suppose it has escaped your notice that when young people get their first taste of argument, they misuse it, as if it were playing a game, always using it for disputation, or perhaps heuristic. They imitate those who have refuted them by refuting others themselves, and, like puppies, enjoy dragging and tearing with argument anyone within reach. I think it's like, check out all these arguments I learned on YouTube. Glaucon, excessively so. Socrates, then, when they have refuted many themselves and had been refuted by many, they quickly fall into violently disbelieving everything they believed before. And as a result of this, they themselves and the whole of philosophy as well are discredited in the eyes of others. Okay, so they're violent. This is if they learn it. Okay, yeah, when they learn it young, they learn how to argue. They just tear apart everything in sight because they got the sweet arguments, and then they don't believe anything themselves and give philosophy a bad name because they're nihilists now. That's absolutely true. But an older person would not be willing to take part in such madness. He will imitate someone who is willing to engage in dialectical discussion and look for the truth, rather than someone who plays at disputation as a game. He will be more moderate himself and will bring honor rather than discredit to the practice. Yeah, it's not that guy just arguing with everybody, always in a bad mood. That's right. And wasn't everything we said before this also said as a precaution that those with whom one takes part in arguments are to be orderly and steady by nature, and not, as now, those, however unsuitable, who chance to come along? Yeah, okay, yeah, so we gotta have to have the right nature to take this up. As it was. Is it enough, then, if someone devotes himself continuously and strenuously to taking part in argument, doing nothing else but training in it just as he did in the physical training that is its counterpart, but for twice as many years? Wow. Okay, so you do your physical training for a while because you're not ready for argument when you're young, and then you train in argument for 1,000,000 years. Do you mean 6 years or 4? It does not matter. Make it 5. Yeah. Like how long should a PhD be? You see, after that, you must make them go down into the cave again and compel them to take command in matters of war and other offices suitable for young people, so that they won't be inferior to the others in experience. Because you remember Socrates is like, yeah, I come back to the cave, and everybody's making fun of me because I don't know the right names for the shadows, but I've seen the sun, man. So he's like, okay, these philosophers, I don't want them to get made fun of the way people make fun of me, basically. And in these offices, too, they must be tested to see whether they will remain steadfast when they are pulled in different directions or give way. How much time do you assign to that? 15 years. Then, at the age of 50, okay, so you train, I don't know what you do in your 20s, but when you're 30, you take up argument, and then when you're 35, you take up war and political office, and then when you're 50, I guess you become a philosopher. And he's got it all laid out here. Okay, then at the age of 50, those who have survived the tests and are entirely best in every practical task, every science must be led at last to the end and compelled to lift up the radiant eye, beams of their souls, and to look toward what itself provides light for everything. And once they have seen the good itself, they must use it as their model and put the city, its citizens, and themselves in order throughout the remainder of their lives, each in turn. They will spend most of their time doing philosophy, but when his turn comes, each must labor in politics and rule for the city's sake, not as something fine, but rather as something that must be done. In that way, always having educated others like themselves to take their place as guardians of the city, they will depart for the Isles of the Blessed and dwell there. And the city will publicly establish memorials and sacrifices to them as demons, if Pythia agrees, but if not, as happy and divine people. Okay, so they go back to they do the argument, and then they go back to the cave for 15 years and do the politics and stuff. And then when they're ready, they take charge of the city, most of their time doing philosophy. And so I guess there's like, you got a bunch of these guys and they kind of take turns. They're either like doing their philosophy or like, hey, bro, your turn, get in there. I'm like, all right, I'll go be king for a while. Because I'd rather be here in the Isle of the Blessed. And I don't want to be in charge. And I guess in that way, like, so having educated others like themselves, so they're like, have this group of them educating each other, maybe educating the 30 to 35-year-olds. And the Isle of the Blessed, before that was used, they said it was like, oh yeah, if you're just doing philosophy all the time, I guess it was, you think of yourself as being in the Isle of the Blessed, so like heaven. And so in this, when he's using it here, I think he's saying they're actually dead. So when they die, they will be kind of treated as a daemon, or made a saint, essentially, being more than man, less than God. But if not, as happy and divine people. Glaucon, like a sculptor, Socrates, you have produced thoroughly beautiful ruling men. And women. Hey, Socrates, and ruling women too, Glaucon. You see, you must not think that what I have said applies any more to men than it does to those women of theirs who are born with the appropriate natures. The radical feminist, at work again. Glaucon, that's right, if indeed they are to share everything equally with the men, as we said. Well then, do you agree that the things we have said about the city and its constitution are not altogether wishful thinking? That it is difficult for them to come about, but possible in a way, and in no way except the one we described. Namely, when one or more true philosophers come to power in a city, people who think little of present honors, regarding them as illiberal and worthless, who prize what is right and honors that come from it above everything, and who consider justice as the greatest and most compulsory thing, serving it and fostering it as they set their city in order? How will they do that? Everyone in the city who is over 10 years old they will send into the country. Okay, so now we're kind of going back for the pre-30 education. They will take over the children, and far removed from current habits which their parents possess, they will bring them up in their own ways and laws, which are the ones we described before. And with the city and constitution we were discussing, thus established in the quickest and easiest way, it will itself be happy and bring the greatest benefit to the people among whom it comes to be. Okay, but not for the people they go to war with. Don't forget the barbarians. Glaucon, that's by far the quickest and easiest way. And in my opinion, Socrates, you have well described how it would come into existence if it ever did. Okay, so like everyone sends their kid away to like philosopher boarding school at age 10, and the philosophers take it from there. Haven't we said enough then about the city and the man who is like it? For surely it is clear what sort of person we will say he has to be. Sort of person. Yes, it is clear. And as for your question, I think we have reached the end of this topic. Okay, there it is. I guess that's how it comes into being, sort of. Yeah, alright, so book 7. That was quite a ride. We started with the cave, and then we got out of the cave, and then started talking about the ideal education. And we had these 4 subjects. What was it? Geometry, mathematics, music, and astronomy. And then Socrates really got into the details of sort of this belief, thought, knowledge, and opinion, I think they were, or imagination is one of them. Oh yeah, there's like, whatever. You had the quadrant, and the top 2 are knowledge, and the bottom 2 are belief. And so that was from the end of book 6, and I thought it was pretty confusing what he was talking about. But now it became a bit more clear, or at least more practical, kind of. So he's got a more immediate sense of these subjects where it's like, oh, just the mathematics you need for buying and selling, that's sort of the visible version. And then we want the person who's contemplating the nature of the thing with the summoner that involves the soul. And he wanted to pick things that were useful in war, but also useful for kind of doing philosophy. But this was all sort of the preparatory education. And then you had this capstone, which is the dialectic. And so in his ideal education, you learn these 4 subjects, but you're not quite ready for dialectic yet. That comes later. So then you do all this physical training. Then when you're 30, you're ready for the dialectic. Which kind of brings everything together and helps you see the good. Then he lays out how you go into politics and war, and then you down into the cave and bring people out of the cave, and then bring them back, and you're ready to rule as a philosopher-king. Yeah, so it's a lot to think about. The cave allegory is awesome. And then, again, I love this little angry outburst of Socrates that seemed to kind of undercut these things that he had said before about these philosophers just being oh so divine and infallible. Because if things go wrong in the city, then you've got these people who are in charge and maybe being evil. And again, there's no... If you think back to some of that esoteric stuff I was talking about, where you have maybe the kind of the ammunition that you need to take apart this argument stashed away back in book 1. Think of it like Chekhov's gun. Think about the question of repaying your debts. Okay, remember we said the reason that justice can't be repaying your debts is your friend gives you a weapon and then your friend goes insane. You should not give an insane person a weapon. Nothing here about people going insane, right? Like, that can happen to anybody. Could happen to, one of these beautiful minds. But no real provision is made for that. So I don't know. There are certain flaws in this, and that other one being angry outburst that shows that you can't just make people divine because they're contemplating all this beautiful stuff. Yeah, so that kind of gets us up to speed. I really don't know where the rest of this book is going to go, because I think we've covered pretty much the whole city at this point. At least on the surface, we have maybe the potential counter arguments in this esoteric thing. If for some reason you just landed in book 7 and started there, go back to my book 6 video and watch the first 10 minutes of that, because that's where I talk about this esoteric reading. Otherwise, hope you're enjoying everything. Hit the old like button on this video and leave a comment if you have anything to add or just have something to say. Or have any question about what I talked about here. Always happy to read and respond, because still don't get a whole lot of comments. All right, hope you're enjoying it, and I will see you all tomorrow.